Hello. What we're going to be doing today is we're going to be going over sections 3.5, 3.6, and 3.7 for our test or for our quiz that's coming up here this Friday. So once this loads here, we'll get started. All right. So for 3.5, we're talking about the year 1776 to 1787. This is 1776, obviously, is the Declaration of Independence. 1787 is the Constitutional Convention. So between 1776 and 1786, individual states are starting to create their own written constitutions. They're limiting centralized power, creating Republican forms of government. A lot of them are adopting Virginia's model, so where you have a Bill of Rights in their constitution to ensure citizens' rights and freedoms. So that statute of religious freedoms that we had mentioned in there is talking about Virginia adopting a set of religious freedom, which was inspired by Thomas Jefferson. That was his pet cause. They're prohibiting titles of nobility and family crests. That's an English thing. All right, we're a country that's trying to set ourselves apart from the country that we left. So I'm sorry to go back to this. These states who are creating these models are setting the tone for what our Constitution is going to look like, especially adopting this Bill of Rights. When the Anti-Federalists are arguing in our Constitutional Convention for a Bill of Rights, they're saying the states provide these freedoms to their people, and they have it written down in social contract form. The federal government needs to do the same thing so that we're assured of our safety from the federal and the state governments. The Articles of Confederation. The Articles of Confederation were what our laws were based on from 1777 to 1789. The Articles of Confederation mean well. The Articles of Confederation attempt to give states more power than the federal government. The founding fathers are obsessed with avoiding a monarchy. I know I said that a million times, but it's worth remembering. They were written primarily by John Dickinson from Pennsylvania. The Articles of Confederation, the glaring weaknesses: they don't give the federal government the power to tax, and they only create one branch of government, the legislative branch. And this legislative branch, again, has no enforcement mechanism. There's no executive. There's no national set of laws. There's no Supreme Court to interpret them. So again, trying to establish a weaker central government was their intention. Sounded good until independence was achieved. The country had to run itself based on these Articles of Confederation, and large problems arose, exacerbated by Shays' Rebellion, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. Towards the end of the war and after, there's issues of military pay sparking conflict. There's all kinds of issues that are taking place with money. There's inflation like crazy. The Continental Congress is printing money and it's becoming valueless, worthless. It's not worth the paper that's printed on at times. A lot of Revolutionary War soldiers are promised land in return for their service, and as we learned in class, some of these soldiers aren't actually receiving their land until maybe upwards of 20 years later. There's huge conflicts over Western lands. Both individuals, the federal government, and the state governments see Western lands as the answer to their problems. It's their salvation. The problem with Western lands early on, and during the war, obviously, is that the British control it. They claim it's theirs. Native Americans in the area have allied themselves with the British. And the Patriots themselves had a really hard time establishing alliances with the Native Americans because the Indians are well aware that the land is in the eyes of the Americans theirs, and so they're going to fight to try to retain it. You have the Spanish on the borders, but after the war is over, the Western lands are going to be seen as salvation because the federal government can sell it to make money since they have no power to tax. If there's cities with a growing population, the West represents an outlet for these extra people. And if you're an individual, you see the West as being your future. You see this as being an opportunity to make something of yourself. All right, so we can see what the map looks like, the cessions of Western lands. Before and even during the Revolution, the holdup on the Articles of Confederation was states like New York, Virginia, North Carolina. Their borders extended in their minds all the way to the Pacific Ocean. It wasn't until they agreed to cede their claims west to the federal government, give their claims to the federal government, to eventually establish states like Kentucky, Tennessee, Alabama, that the states agreed to adopt the Articles of Confederation. All right, so the Northwest Ordinance of 1785 sets up the townships. It sets up acres in the 640. I'm sorry, like plots in the 640 acre plots. Establishes an orderly system by which territories become states to come into the Union, having a population of 60,000, a Republican form of government in the written Constitution. Eventually, the Northwest Ordinance of 1787 is going to outlaw slavery north of the Ohio River. That's considered to be the biggest positive achievement of the Articles of Confederation. I mentioned earlier that Shays' Rebellion is going to be the straw that broke the camel's back as far as the realization that the Articles of Confederation do not have any teeth, they do not have any power. The state of Massachusetts passed a law saying taxes had to be paid in gold or silver because paper money was worthless. These farmers in Massachusetts do not have the money in gold or silver to pay. He and a group of farmers lead a rebellion in Massachusetts surrounding courthouses, banks, in order to try to keep the land that the states are threatening to foreclose upon if these farmers cannot pay their taxes. Many of them are Revolutionary War veterans themselves who feel let down by the government. The federal government here is not able to put this down. The state of Massachusetts has to put it down. The realization here is that the federal government cannot, they can declare war, but they can't raise an army, they can't tax, they don't have any power to suppress something like this if it comes up in the future. So they agree in 1786 to meet in Annapolis to discuss revising the Articles of Confederation. They agree there to meet in Philadelphia in the summer of 1787, and from there they're going to meet to try to revise the Articles. It says here for 3-6, reframing the American government. James Madison, when he comes to the Constitutional Convention, when he comes to Philadelphia, I should say, in 1787, he already has an outline for a constitution written out. He realizes that the Articles of Confederation are beyond saving. You have men like James Monroe who are trying to hold on to the Articles, trying to hold on to the essence of what the country was founded upon. And you have men like James Madison and Alexander Hamilton, George Washington, Benjamin Franklin. They realize that the Articles of Confederation, while they are well-meaning, are not going to meet the needs of where our country is going. 55 delegates meet in 1787 in Philadelphia to hammer out a plan of government. You have two competing plans of government. You have the Virginia plan, New Jersey plan. The Articles only have one branch of government and a legislative branch. The Constitution is going to make three. But the question is, what's the legislative branch going to look like? Virginia says that they want a bicameral legislature. That's two chambers. But they're going to both be based off of population. New Jersey says we're going to have a unicameral. That's one chamber of legislative branch. They're going to be based on the equality of the states, like the Articles of Confederation, where each state gets an equal say in what happens. Each state gets one vote, just like in the Articles of Confederation. Very long story short, Connecticut Compromise, or the Great Compromise, is reached, where they agree to merge the two plans, if you will. So they take the Virginia plan and the New Jersey plan, they mesh them together to create the modern day Congress that we have now. The Virginia plan leads to our modern day House of Representatives based on population. For instance, Pennsylvania has 18 members of the House of Representatives. Wyoming has 1. California has 53. It's all about giving larger states a say. New Jersey plan is our modern day Senate. Each state, regardless of size, has 2 members. Wyoming has 2. Pennsylvania has 2. California has 2. This appeases the smaller states. So now we got the legislative branch figured out. The executive branch is going to have a president. Eventually, it's going to include a cabinet, and the judicial branch is going to be the Supreme Court. Slavery has been a question throughout early American history and will be through the Civil War. And then you have a different movement that begins, but we'll get to that another time. But the 3/5 Compromise. Southerners have to sign to the Constitution to make it effective. 9 of the 13 states have to sign the Constitution to make it effective. You have Georgia, you have South Carolina, North Carolina, you have Virginia, you have Maryland, you have Delaware. These are states that are slave-holding states. And at this time, northern states too, but slavery's on the way out in these northern states. But in order to make the southern states, or allow the southern states to sign, in order to convince them to sign, slavery is going to be left inside the Constitution. Southerners want their slaves to count for population so they can have more membership in the House of Representatives. Northerners do not like this. The 3/5 Compromise says that for every 5 African slaves, they're going to count as 3 people for representation. All right, taxes will be paid on that, but they will count as 3 people for every 5 actual physical persons, which gives the South disproportionate power in the House of Representatives. We got federalism as an issue. So you see the word federalism here. That's just the sharing of power between the federal and state government. It does not mean the federal government is stronger or the state government is stronger. It means the sharing of power. central government's powers increased in a new constitution. So the central government, the federal government under the Constitution, is obviously going to be more powerful than the Articles of Confederation. That's the whole point of having the Constitutional Convention, is realizing the federal government needed to be stronger. We're going to eventually get the states retaining all rights that were not specifically granted to the federal government. That will be enshrined in our Bill of Rights, the 10th Amendment. Electoral college is created. This appeases the smaller states. They create the House of Representatives for 2-year terms. Senate has 6-year terms. But what I want to get to that really focus on here is the division of philosophies between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. Federalists included men like Alexander Hamilton, George Washington, James Madison. James Madison is eventually going to have kind of a reckoning, and he's going to change his tune a little bit. But for now, we got Alexander Hamilton, who's leading this charge for a strong federal government. Federalists tend to live in East Coast, seaboard cities, a little bit more wealthy. You have Anti-Federalists, men like Thomas Jefferson, George Mason, Samuel Adams, men who are reluctant to allow for a stronger federal government because that, in their minds, represents tyranny. The Anti-Federalists are pushing hard for a Bill of Rights. They do not want to sign to the Constitution. The scale is tipped in the Federalist favor when James Madison, John Jay, and Alexander Hamilton collectively write was known as the Federalist Papers. Alexander Hamilton writes 51 of the 85 Federalist Papers. They go out to New York newspapers and filter through the 13 states. It's an argument for a stronger federal government. The public they're trying to reach out to the public, because when the Constitution is adopted by the delegates in September of 1787, it's not official. It is not official until 9 of the 13 state legislatures sign on to the Constitution. So you got to go back to Harrisburg, and you got to show the state legislatures that they need to vote for the new Constitution, the new Federalist system of government. Very long story short, there are intense debates. States like New York, Virginia, Massachusetts, the voting is very, very close. So it's by no means unanimous within the states, but all 13 states eventually do sign on to the Constitution. The first state to sign is Delaware. They're the first state to ratify the Constitution. Pennsylvania is the second state. The 9th state, New Hampshire, is what makes it official in 1788. Then in 1789, you have your first presidential election. The Electoral College unanimously chooses George Washington as the president and John Adams as the vice president. You can see here is the voting tally for the different states. Very, very close. Some states obviously had unanimous choices. Other states extraordinarily close. It was not a foregone conclusion that the Bill of Rights that the Constitution would pass in these states. And lastly, Module 3.7, legacies of the American Revolution. A legacy is how you're remembered, or what is left behind when you're gone. So what does the American Revolution lead to? It doesn't work out well for everybody. Women, African Americans, Native Americans obviously do not benefit the same as white people had benefited after the Revolution was over. Veterans don't benefit the way that they were hoping to. Many veterans do not receive the pay that they were hoping to get or promised to get. They don't receive the land that they were promised, some of them for upwards of 20 years. There is an economic depression in the United States after the war. State governments are the source of money for for the federal government at this time, and not everybody's paying what they say that they're going to pay. States have their own debts to pay off. It's not until Alexander Hamilton becomes the Treasury Secretary, which we'll be getting to in 3-8 and 3-9, that the federal government assumes the debts of the states. So there's a lot of economic issues early on. We talked about women's limited economic independence. Women like Abigail Adams, all the correspondence between her and John Adams survives, and talking about women's rights and women seeking greater equality in our new government. The only state that gave women the right to vote after the Revolution was New Jersey. Also gave free blacks the right to vote. Again, like I said in class, sounds like a tremendous question for your quiz. We're trying to establish an identity as a country. When we think about the Revolution, we're fighting for freedom. We're fighting against monarchy. We're fighting for a republic, which is what we have. We're not a true democracy. We're a republic. We elect leaders that represent us. But Noah Webster, famously, he's an educator in Massachusetts, writes, "America must be as independent in literature as in politics, as famous for arts as for arms." So we have to have more of an American culture that we're developing here. We don't really have any great American novels or novelists until the 19th century. In the 18th century, we have some pamphleteers, men like Thomas Paine, Alexander Hamilton. But as far as the arts go, we have men like like Charles Peale that painted the famous painting of George Washington. We have people who are inspired by works of European artists. We're developing national symbols like the eagle. The flag, has great significance in our country. So symbols are very important to our country, but we're establishing early on a national identity that's going to grow and flourish. We have academies of science, we have academy of arts, we have medical schools that are coming to our country. We're growing. We're an infant country. The potential is there, but we have to work very hard to achieve what we want to achieve. Native Americans, it's interesting. Native Americans were respected in ways, and in other ways, obviously treated very poorly. If you're living on the East Coast and you're in the cities, the Native Americans are definitely they're mysterious figures. There a lot of towns are named after Indian tribes, a lot of rivers, bridges. If you're living on the frontier, you view Native Americans differently because they're competing with you for land. We talk about slavery. We talked about how in the South, slavery, the Southern plantation owners are starting to tighten their grip on slavery. The more slaves there are, and the more America's economy depends on slave labor in the South, the tighter the restrictions are going to become on slavery. It's going to be harder to free your slaves. They're going to make it harder to educate your slaves, things of that nature. There are groups in the North, specifically the Quakers, that are starting to really reconsider slavery. And by the 1780s, the Quakers themselves were at the forefront of abolitionism and wanted to get rid of slavery, period. They see it as a moral, economic evil. All right, that's pretty much all you need to know for your quiz. If you have any questions, feel free to email me. If not, it is 30 questions, matching names, matching vocab terms, true, false, and some multiple choice.